Howdy and welcome to the Strange West inaugural podcast. My name is Trent Tano, word hustler extraordinaire.
First off, introducing us with his magnificent rendition of Ennio Morricone's For a Few Dollars More is the mighty Mitch Polzak and the Royal Deuces. If you like what you heard, get those fingers to fly to MitchPolzak.com. That's Mitch Polzak, Polzak.com. For the first episode of the Strange West podcast, what better theme than Cowboys versus Nazis? If you love cowboys and dead Nazis, then do I have the tale for you in the novel Paris High Noon by none other than yours truly, Trent Tano.
You can get a copy at ParisHighNoon.com, both paperback and ebook at ParisHighNoon.com. Find us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. Now, as a special treat, we have the voice talents of veteran actor James K. Doyle. Thank you again, James, for lending us your time and talent to this podcast. And now, without further ado, here is Chapter 1 of Paris High Noon.
Paris High Noon, Chapter 1, in a small cafe. William Catfish Hancock walked downstairs to the lobby of the Hotel Héros Moffett, which looked like a saloon 5 years after the gold had played out. His spurs jingled as he sat in a soft beam of morning light facing the door. Off in the distance, a score of church bells tolled 10 o'clock. The chimes echoed across the facades of Paris, rolling down the empty boulevards and bouncing off statues, which stood mute like rocky mesas, disinterested in the problems of men. Normally, morning meant the smell of croissants from the bakery just 2 doors down, so fresh that a haze of flour wafted down the street, dusting pedestrians. So much coffee brewed in every cafe that the blue sky threatened to turn a sweet milky brown. Yet today the city slumbered, still hoping against hope that the last few weeks had been nothing more than a nightmare. Morning brought the terror of life under the Nazi jackboot, along with mundane everyday affairs. Bills had to be paid, shops needed to be opened, and dusty floors had to be swept, despite the fact that liberté, égalité, and fraternité were nothing more than discredited words. The Parisians didn't resist the facts they woke up to, but continued to plod around like cattle in the feedlot, waiting for the eastbound trains. Bernard, the proprietor of the Hotel Héros Moffett, a nervous, balding man whose perspiration ran down his face and wicked off his waxed mustache, approached the old cowboy who had been living up in room 305 for the past 3 years. Like all men, Bernard was afraid of what he did not understand, and the first time Catfish entered the parlor, wrapped in a linen duster and a well-worn cowboy hat, his mouth dropped open as if he'd backed into a prickly pear. He saw visions of blazing six-guns, horses crashing through the lobby, and wild lassos flying through the air, snaring everything from bottles of wine to his daughter's virginity. But the old cowboy had only smiled, stretching his long, silvery mustache from one wind-worn ear to the other to remove all doubt. "Good morning, monsieur," Bernard said, though in truth there wasn't much good about it. France had fallen. Her soldiers had run like scolding children from a one-room schoolmarm. "Morning, bandito," Catfish said. The old cowboy's French sounded like a jumping Hoya in Bernard's ear, but he had passion in his vowels, which was what counted most. "What can I get you?" "I'll take a cup of coffee that'll float a pistol, and while you're at it, how about a big chunk of crap?" You mean crepe, monsieur." Catfish laughed and raised his hands. "Got me again, bandito." Catfish eased back into his chair and stroked his mustache while he waited for his coffee. In all of his years in Paris, he had never thought it could turn into a ghost town. Trash and paper tumbled down the cobblestone streets, and shop signs creaked in the wind like old bones. He remembered the first time he came to Paris, back with Brazos Billy's Wild West show. It was a spark of a city back then, and when he came back during the Great War, it was still sparking. Some nights he heard the thunder of the distant guns, but it seemed folks didn't much care, as if Paris herself would guard them from the sputtering bombers and lumbering zeppelins. The large doors of the hotel opened. A round little man with sweat pouring over his face waddled in. Catfish smiled and pulled out a flask of Kentucky bourbon. "Touch of the brown, Hiccup?" Catfish asked his Parisian host. Huckleter Hiccup Nerveau sat down at the table with his back to the door and waved off the bourbon. "I told you 100 times," Catfish said to his friend and business partner. "The day you don't face the front of any entrance is the day you get shot. That's what happened to Wild Bill Hickok. Of course, he had it coming." "I can't believe you're still here," Hiccup stammered. The lumpy Frenchman had a stutter that at times got so bad Catfish had to translate for him. Sweat dripped down his jowls and dampened the lace tablecloth. Catfish grabbed a napkin from another table and gave it to Hiccup to wipe his face down. The first thing Catfish liked about Paris were the lace tablecloths in every cafe and restaurant. No matter how shabby, lace was as ordinary an occurrence for Parisians as cowboys farting around the campfire. "Good God, Hiccup! Someone looking at you sweating like that may think you just tickled the fanny of a nun." "Don't you understand that the Boche are here?" Hiccup asked. The old cowboy held his tongue. The whole world knew the Germans were in Paris, and in Belgium, and in Norway, and in Holland, and in Poland. Catfish thought he might roll over in his bed one night and find a Hun sleeping right next to him. Bernard came back with his coffee. He looked down at Hiccup with the solidarity that condemned men have walking to the gallows. Catfish poured a generous touch of brown into his coffee. "How about a cup of the black stuff before we head out?" Hiccup agreed to the coffee. Not that he needed any more stimuli this morning. He felt a twinge of guilt for his friend. He had hoped the old cowboy would ride out his last days in Paris, sharing his stories of a vanished life with the youth of France. It was also easy money, and the pair rode the lecture circuit like two cowboys on a drive full of sunny skies, fresh grass, and plenty of water. At first, the professors were apprehensive having an American cowboy speak. Most of the foreign lecturers were teachers or men of standing. What could a rough old cowboy say that would make any sense of the times they lived in now? But all it took was for Catfish to smile with his silver mustache, looking like the wings of a vagabond angel, and the crowd was enchanted. Now the universities were closed indefinitely. There was no one to lecture to. No halls full of excited young students hanging on every word, every nuance of Catfish's soft, scratchy voice. And here was Catfish, with his cowboy hat and linen duster on, dressing and acting like he did every morning, with a light heart and not a care in the world. "You're an American," Hiccup began as his coffee arrived. "You can still get out of France. You should have left with the other Americans." Hiccup sipped his coffee and wiped the sweat from his face. "You could be in New York City right now." Catfish swirled the coffee around in his cup. Never once since the start of the war did he consider going back to America. Any wanted posters of him were probably in a museum, and any lawman who had chased him throughout the decades was either dead or so old they'd have a better chance of making water than an arrest. He wouldn't leave because he had come to love Paris for all the same reasons he loved the wide-open Wild West. It was a place bigger than he was, and the thought of it being conquered tore at his soul.